guys, welcome back to the Not Carrie Bradshaw YouTube channel. I know it's been a minute. In this video, we are going to talk about Law Roach and his retirement announcement and subsequent interview with Lindsay of The Cut. So for background, who is Law Roach? Law Roach is an image architect, stylist to the A-list, most notably for Zendaya. She is a huge fashion girl, red carpet fave, and he is responsible for that. She's had like several brand ambassadorships because of the way in which he has styled her to absolute perfection. You may also recall that for a minute, Celine Dion was giving us just like next level looks, and it was like, where did this come from? Why? We're just grateful for it. He was responsible for that. He also styled Anya Taylor-Joy and Anne Hathaway, really top tier A-list celebrities. And shortly after the Oscars, which is one of the biggest nights in fashion per the red carpet, right after that, he announced his retirement from styling. And a lot of people, including myself, were absolutely stunned because it was like, what the hell is this? I will be the first to admit I thought it was a publicity stunt. Here's why. We all saw a few weeks ago, Paris Fashion Week, there was this disagreement happening front row at Louis Vuitton. He and Zendaya arrived. There was a seat for Zendaya, but not a seat for him. And we see Zendaya point behind her like this, and it looks like she's telling him to sit behind her. What he revealed in this interview with Lindsay for The Cut is that Zendaya was actually saying that seat was for her personal assistant, and the publicist who is responsible for the seating at Fashion Week failed to actually give him a seat. So a lot of people thought, oh, he's retiring in response to that disrespect, and this was a diva move. I was one of those people. I was like, okay, she's the client, you're not the star. Why do you feel entitled? You know, that was my initial perception. What he said in his retirement announcement is that he could no longer handle the politics and the false narratives and things like that. He got this outpouring of love and support. One of those people was the editor-in-chief of British Vogue, Edward Enninful, and he deserves that recognition. He deserves the attention that he got because he's really done a lot in his career, especially for someone who's not classically trained, which to be a stylist, there isn't really training. There isn't a degree. It's something that's in you, not on you, basically. Why am I talking about this? Because I could kind of relate, especially after seeing the interview that was really well done by Lindsay Peoples. It was a really good follow-up to her initial piece that she did a few years ago about what it's like to be Black in fashion. I used to work in corporate fashion. I interned at Oscar de la Renta. I worked at Burberry. I worked at Coach. And I realized some of the same things that Law Roach discussed in this interview and in his post about the industry, which isn't just unique to fashion. It actually applies to all of corporate America. I even wrote about this during lockdown when so much of the fashion industry realized, oh, we're not great to Black people and people of color. Once everybody decided that, oh, Black people were right the whole time after they witnessed George Floyd die. So there was this whole thing of, oh, we're listening and we're learning and we want to do better. What I want to discuss today is the ways in which what Law Roach is talking about is indicative of how corporate culture is structured around WASP culture, which teaches and reinforces and socializes people to completely avoid conflict. And when he talks in this video about what it means to stand up for yourself and to ask to be given the grace to just do your job well. People who are incredibly privileged and who are aspiring to that level of privilege, we're talking the 1%, the people who use summer as a verb, the people who ask you what your father does when they meet you so that they can determine what your pedigree is. Those people and the people who aspire to be like them or to associate with them, not only are they taught to avoid conflict, but they are taught to address it in fakeness, in passive aggressive speak, in burying the lead, in victimizing themselves if someone calls something out. So that's a part of like Karen culture. It's a means of upholding white supremacy ultimately, because anytime a person, especially a person of color, a person of quote unquote lower social status, calls something out, you are shaking the table for these people who just don't handle conflict in that manner. For people like Law Roach and like myself, who are Black and who come from Black places and who are proud of our identity as Black Americans, that's just not how we're raised. Like, people in this culture don't even have the language or the terms for what we would call just like real talk, straight up, like, let me just give it to you like it is. They have no concept of that, right? They really benefit from social capital. And the people who have the most social capital, who have the most privilege, are actually the least courageous when it comes to speaking up, not only for themselves, but for people, quote unquote, under them. So if you come in as a stylist, as someone who is support staff, as someone who is very junior, and you have a call out about microaggressions, about how something can even be done better, how things could be done more efficiently. If you're a creative like Law Roach and you come in and advocate for your client and you're saying like, this is what I know based on my track record, this is what would be best, and you don't just eat shit, those people look at you like you're the problem. You're difficult to work with. You're a diva. You're not given very much grace to just handle those things. That's not how we're used to dealing with conflict. It can be argued that in some Black communities, maybe we overcorrect and we're too confrontational, and it leads into these other conversations about violence, quote unquote. There's a middle ground. People should be able to advocate for themselves without being deemed the problem. That's what Law Roach has experienced. The world of fashion, I was aware of how corporate structure worked because I started working in fashion, I guess, relatively late. But I did not know that it was what it was to this extent until I got into this industry that's really based on pedigree and nepotism. It's this whole thing of no one in fashion really gets paid very well on a junior level because they expect that if you can indulge in a career with something as quote unquote frivolous as fashion, be it on the business side or the creative side, then you must have the privilege to not really need very much pay. And a lot of the people who walk into those positions come from families that subsidize their living. So I was interning with girls who lived in these really nice places in New York City that I could not begin to afford. They had like doormans and they had laundry in the building and they had all these really nice amenities. And I'm just like, damn, are they getting paid? No, they came from generational wealth and their dad knew somebody who knew somebody and they kind of walked into those positions. One example of this was Oscar PR Girl. She was like such a big deal for a while. And I was so impressed by her when I first started interning. And then I listened to her speak about her career trajectory. She did not really care about fashion. She got a degree in art history and her dad got her a job at, I think it was Dolce & Gabbana as an assistant. And she just was kind of handed these roles. For us, people who come from working class families, or at least where your parents are working class, we're just taught to work really hard. Nobody tells us about what it means to also have to be likable in corporate environments. We're just taught, keep your head down, do your work, and that will get you where you're supposed to be. You also have to be likable to white people, and nobody teaches us what that's like, because to be likable to these people who are at the very top, it's an exchange of social capital. And if you play the race card, you are a problem. If you demand better treatment than your white counterparts, you are a problem. So many times where I have called out a policy or anything that didn't feel right, didn't feel fair, felt like a microaggression, I was gaslighted and I was always told, oh, they do that to everybody. That's how everyone is treated. And it became so apparent to me that white people or people of privilege within that culture, within that bubble, they are so used to the hierarchy and eating shit from anyone who has more social capital than them, that you coming in as a Black person, as an intern, as a junior employee of any kind, who do you think you are to ask to be treated better than people who are above you? This is why, for me personally, cowardice is one of the worst qualities a person can have. Because when you choose to remain silent or to remain neutral, when people are coming to you as management, you are basically empowering the people above you to harm not only you, but the people under you. The people who have the most social capital, who have the least to lose, seem to be the least willing to use it to help other people. They seem to be the least brave when it comes to creating change. And I was just at a screening for the 1619 Project where Wesley Morris was talking about how Black people are constantly looked at to solve these issues. And it's like, well, what should we do? We can't do anything because we didn't create these problems across industries within our country. We did not create these structures or these systems that uphold white supremacy. So how can we be expected to undo them? All we can do is call them out. And when you're someone like Law Roach, who comes from the South Side of Chicago, who is really self-made, and I'm cautious about using that because I think, we're communal people, but, for the sake of this conversation, he's a self-made person. We don't really have a fear of losing social capital because we haven't ever really had very much to begin with. And we've earned the things that we have in this life from the sweat of our brow. You might get lucky and somebody likes you and they'll, promote you or vouch for you and you can advance in that way. But we don't really tend to have that fear of losing social capital, which we've never really had. So we're not as fearful of speaking out because it's like, you can't really take anything from me that you haven't even given me. One thing that he said that I thought was really interesting is that you don't start getting credit or clout until you're validated by white people. And that is a very true, very sad thing. He talks about how he would like to be celebrated more by his own people and that he hasn't been invited to the BET Awards or anything like that. I just want to make note that when I met Law Roach a few years ago, maybe 2018 or something like that, it was at Harlem's Fashion Row. They have an annual award show. He was being honored, I think, as like Maverick of the Year for his work styling. And he was very warm, one of the nicer celebrities that I have met within the industry, because a lot of y'all's faves are not friendly towards the Black girls that they claim to champion, but that's another conversation for another day. He was absolutely lovely, but I wonder why he didn't being acknowledged by Harlem's Fashion Row, because it's a smaller organization, I guess. Your people have celebrated you, but maybe you're kind of falling in a little bit to the thing of like, you want the big name, you want the bigger name, even within our community. You have been honored and you have been recognized. And I'm going to charge that more so to his memory than to his heart, because there's obviously a lot going on for him. He talked about his first time being depressed and dealing with grief and not being given the grace to deal with those things as a human person. And fashion is an industry where they don't care. I mean, I think corporate America, they don't care. We are cogs in a machine. And the emotional labor that I think is required as a Black person, as a queer Black person, as a Black woman, I know me personally, there is a huge amount of emotional labor that I do in my role now, I completely left corporate fashion. I even wrote an article about it for the Covertura. I'll put a link in the video description, where I'll also link to his interview with Lindsay Peoples. But I left corporate fashion to start doing fashion independently, because my situation with Coach, it was one of the worst experiences of my life. That's another conversation for another day. I had a temp position with Burberry, ended up getting let go on my birthday, and I was like, oh my God, I think I have to move back to Atlanta. And a friend of mine sent me to a temp service, because she was like, absolutely not. There's nothing for you to do in Atlanta. And I was like, you're not wrong. And that recruiter sat across from me and was like, you don't have no money. You are poor. And if you keep trying to work in fashion, you're going to continue to be poor. They don't pay. They're not going to pay. And I was like, well, I have an interview at Dior in a couple of days. And she was like, do you want to wear Dior or work for Dior? Because I guarantee you can't do both. And it was such a gut punch that I absolutely needed, because she was like, you can access fashion in a lot of ways. You can work in fashion in a lot of ways that don't require you to be poor. And my family was helping me so much while I was in school at FIT, while I was interning, while I was taking these jobs that paid nothing. And I just didn't want them to have to do that anymore. And I decided to take my content creation, my freelance writing much more seriously. And I just left and went to another industry where I could be paid a livable wage for New York. So I completely understand Law Roach and his choice to say, like, I'm done, especially because you don't want to be in service to people who don't respect you as a human. He kept repeating the word, like, being in service. And I understand that so deeply, because a good stylist looks at their clients and decides how to style them based on who they are, based on who they want to be, what they want to communicate about themselves as an actor, as a performer, as a celebrity, where they want to go. If you want to be a fashion girl, he's one of the people that you go to. But these agencies have lists of stylists that when they have their like A-list clients, they say, these are the stylists that you go to, and they'll take you where you want to be. He has never been on that list. Why? That list looks pretty homogenous, and you can guess what it looks like, because within that system, they continue to promote their own. Look at who most of the creative directors are. Look at who most of the editors-in-chief are. Lindsay Peoples, that's a new appointment. Edward Interful, that's a relatively new appointment. Anna Wintour will likely never step down from American Vogue. It's upholding a system where the people at the top get to be at the helm of an industry that likes to consider itself progressive, even though they only hire people who look and live a certain kind of way. We started to see some change once again during the summer of George Floyd, but Law Roach is proof that that change is not following through, because these people will not exchange their social capital to advance or support or give grace to people who need it. And even if we look at the way Angela Bassett is being talked about for not being more gracious in the face of a loss at the Oscars, Black people are expected to take it on the chin all the time, and take it on the chin with a smile. Otherwise, you make the white people uncomfortable. You make the privileged people really uncomfortable when you refuse to adhere to their system of conflict avoidance. And people can only bite their tongue so much. And I'm really happy for him that he has the resources and the bravery to leave an industry, to leave a position, not an industry, because he's been clear that he's not abandoning fashion, not even abandoning, but that he's not retiring from fashion, but he is retiring from being in service to people in that way. I'm happy that he's established himself enough to be able to make that choice. He's already signed on to be creative director for a brand. He walked in the Hugo Boss show. I'm excited to see what else he does. He has a book deal, and I hope that this transition really works out for him, and that he's able to give more of what he wants to give to the industry on his own terms. But I just wanted to say I'm so happy that I didn't release any content just based on that announcement, because I really did think that it was a publicity stunt. But having worked in fashion, he is telling the absolute truth of what it means to be in those spaces and to just be overlooked and considered the problem for not just accepting what even the people above you accept from the people above them. It is a trickle down of disrespect, and those people are not socialized to speak up for themselves, so they certainly will not speak up for you. And that really sucks, because in order for change to really happen, it's the people who have the least to lose who have to speak up the most, but who are the most fearful of doing so. And that puts us in a really precarious situation as Black people in any industry. Everything is already just a little bit more, or a lot a bit more challenging for us, depending on what the situation is, and that we have to suffer the indignities of this world outside of our workplace just to be able to get a job, to sustain ourselves, to make a living wage, to be able to afford housing, and then to get into that space where your livelihood is at stake and have to deal with so much and just take so much on the chin and do it with a smile. Kudos to him for saying, no longer, not me, I'm not doing it. So I encourage you guys to watch the interview, slide in the comments, let me know what you guys think about this whole situation. I'll put links in the video description, like I said. Be sure to like, comment, subscribe, tell a friend to tell a friend, and I'll talk to you guys soon. Bye.